On a Sunday morning in September 2018, Juan David Ortiz sat in a pew at the First Assembly of God Church in Laredo, Texas, the way he did every week. He was a supervisory intelligence agent with the United States Border Patrol, a decorated Iraq War veteran with a master's degree, a husband and father with a mortgage on a quiet house in a new subdivision. His colleagues considered him one of the best agents in the sector. His supervisors had his name on a list for promotion. To everyone who knew him, he was exactly what he appeared to be. A disciplined public servant who had built something solid and was still building. By the time that Sunday evening ended, 2 women were dead on the rural roads outside Laredo. Shot at close range with a government-issued service weapon, their bodies left face down in the dirt like they were nothing. Over the 12 days that followed, 2 more women were killed in exactly the same way. 4 women in total. Shot in the head and abandoned on the same dark roads outside the city. Some left on the ground, 1 left under an overpass, 1 left in a gravel pit so far from the avenue that investigators did not even know she was dead until the killer himself told them where to find her. All 4 were killed with the same weapon, the same government-issued .40 caliber handgun that Juan David Ortiz carried to work every morning at the South Texas Border Intelligence Center. The same building where investigators were working around the clock to find the man responsible. He sat at his desk and read every report they filed. He watched every move they made. He knew exactly how far behind they were, and he would have kept going. He said so himself. He told investigators after his arrest that he had planned to keep killing until someone stopped him. In the end, it was not a detective who stopped him. It was not a task force or a surveillance operation or an intelligence breakthrough. It was a 26-year-old woman with no shoes and no shirt, running barefoot across a gas station parking lot in the middle of the night, screaming for help. She did in 30 seconds what law enforcement could not do in 12 days. She ran straight to a state trooper pumping gas at the Stripes convenience store on San Bernardo Avenue, told him everything she knew, and the manhunt that followed ended with Juan David Ortiz crouching in the bed of a stranger's truck in a hotel parking garage at 2 in the morning. On December 7, 2022, a jury of 8 women and 4 men found Juan David Ortiz guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never leave a cell. But the verdict is only the end of the story. What happened in those 12 days? The warnings nobody acted on, the women who knew before the investigators did, the one woman who ran barefoot across a parking lot and changed everything. None of it is simple. And none of it is comfortable. This video goes through all of it. Every decision, every missed opportunity, every moment where things could have gone differently and did not. Because this case is not just about what Juan David Ortiz did in the dark. It is about everything that had to fail in sequence for him to keep doing it. If you have ever watched a case and asked yourself how nobody saw it coming, stay until the end. The answer is in here, and it is not the one you are expecting. This is No Way Out, where every case goes deeper than the headline, deeper than the verdict, all the way down to the truth. Subscribe so you never miss one. Juan David Ortiz was born on May 22, 1983, in Brownsville. He grew up in a Pentecostal household where church was not a Sunday obligation, but the framework around which daily life was built. Rules mattered. Discipline mattered. Those values planted themselves in him early. He was not a difficult boy. People who knew him as a teenager described someone friendly, confident, and well-liked. He attended Gladys Porter Early College High School, joined activities, and left a positive impression on teachers and peers alike. There were no incidents, no run-ins with the law, no patterns of behavior that pointed toward anything troubling. By every visible measure, he was a well-adjusted young person from a structured home who was preparing to step into a responsible life. By his final year of high school, he had already decided what came next. The military was a natural fit. South Texas had a strong tradition of it, and Juan had the discipline and the motivation to back the decision up. He chose the Navy, specifically the medical side. He wanted to be a hospital corpsman, the person who kept wounded people alive when everything around them was falling apart. The idea suited someone raised on service and sacrifice. On July 5, 2001, just over a month after his 18th birthday, he officially entered the United States Navy, about 10 weeks before the world changed forever. Juan David Ortiz reported to Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois for basic training in the summer of 2001. Great Lakes sat on the western shore of Lake Michigan, north of Chicago, and it was the Navy's primary boot camp facility. Every year, thousands of young men and women passed through its gates and came out the other side as sailors. The training was demanding, structured, and designed to strip away whatever each recruit brought with them and replace it with something more capable of functioning under pressure. For Juan, the transition was not especially hard. He had come from a household built on discipline and structure, and the military environment, while intense, was not entirely foreign to him. He adapted. He followed orders. He performed well enough to move forward without issue. From Great Lakes, he was sent to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, for his medical training. Fort Sam Houston was one of the primary medical training installations for the U.S. military, and it was where hospital corpsmen learned their trade. The curriculum was demanding. Corpsmen were expected to treat wounds, manage trauma, administer medications, and keep people alive in field conditions that were nothing like a hospital. They trained with the knowledge that someday, someone's life would depend on how well they had learned what they were being taught. Juan qualified as an emergency medical technician during his time at Fort Sam. He was good at it. The work suited him, the precision, the high stakes, the satisfaction of knowing that his training had a direct and immediate impact on whether someone lived or died. He carried himself well through the program and earned his next assignment. He was sent to 29 Palms, California. The Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, one of the most demanding training installations in the American military. It sat in the Mojave Desert, vast and unforgiving, and it was where Marine units prepared for combat. Juan was attached to the 1st Marine Division as a Navy corpsman, embedded with the Marines as their medical support. For 3 years, he worked alongside them, trained alongside them, and built the kind of bonds that formed when people shared difficult conditions for extended periods. Those years at 29 Palms changed him. The Marines he worked with were hard, capable people, and working beside them reshaped how he understood himself. He absorbed their culture. The intensity, the brotherhood, the sense that the world was divided into people who could handle hard things and people who could not. He saw himself as someone who could handle hard things. 3 years of proving it reinforced that belief. Then came the news that everyone in the military had been expecting since September 2001. The 1st Marine Division was deploying to the Middle East. The invasion of Iraq was being planned, and the corpsmen attached to Marine units were going with them. Juan David Ortiz was going to war. He packed his gear, said whatever goodbyes he was able to say, and prepared himself for what was coming. He was trained. He was ready, as much as anyone could be ready. He had spent years building toward this, and now it had arrived. In 2003, he deployed first to Kuwait and then into Baghdad with the 1st Marine Division. The invasion was underway. The fighting had already begun, and the young man from Brownsville, the church-going corpsman with the easy smile and the solid reputation, was about to walk into something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Baghdad, in 2003, was not a place that left people unchanged. The city was in the middle of an invasion that would reshape the entire region for decades. The fighting was real. The danger was constant, and the casualties arrived in ways that no amount of training fully prepared a person to handle. Hospital corpsmen like Juan David Ortiz were on the front lines of that reality, not as the ones pulling the trigger, but as the ones who showed up immediately after and tried to keep the wounded alive long enough to reach actual medical care. What a combat medic saw in a war zone could not be summarized neatly. The human body under extreme trauma was not the same thing people learned about in medical training classrooms. The decisions a corpsman had to make, who to treat first, what could be saved, what could not, were decisions that landed in the body differently than they landed in the textbooks. Juan was in Baghdad with the 1st Marine Division during some of the most intense fighting of the early invasion. He did his job. He treated the wounded. He functioned under pressure. By the official record, there were no disciplinary problems, no breakdowns, no incidents that raised flags with his superiors. He performed his duties and he came home. But something came home with him. The people who knew him in the years after Iraq began to notice things that had not been there before. A Marine buddy, someone who had served alongside him and remained in contact after the deployment, described receiving text messages from Juan that were unsettling in their content. Juan wrote to him about feeling like he was back in Iraq, like every day was a return to the war, like the tension had never fully released. He wrote this not from a combat zone, but from a desk in Texas, years after the shooting had stopped. What Juan was describing in those messages was the texture of post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD was not a sign of weakness or failure. It was what happened to the human nervous system when it had been exposed to extreme trauma without the right support to recover from it. The brain and the body held on to what they had survived, and they kept responding to it long after the immediate danger had passed. For veterans who saw combat, that response could persist for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives. The Veterans Administration eventually diagnosed Juan with PTSD. He was given prescription medication, a combination of drugs to manage the anxiety, the depression, and the symptoms that continued to disrupt his sleep and his daily functioning. The nightmares were real. When Juan came home from Baghdad in May 2009, he was honorably discharged from the United States Navy at the rank of Hospital Corpsman Second Class, nearly 8 years of service, a clean record, and a future that still looked bright from the outside. He had also been pursuing education while he served. He completed a bachelor's degree in criminal justice through American Military University, an online institution that catered specifically to active-duty military personnel and veterans. He was not just a veteran, he was an educated man with plans. Those plans had a clear next step. The Border Patrol was actively recruiting veterans, and Juan was exactly the profile they were looking for. What made the offer especially attractive was a specific provision. His 8 years of military service would count toward the 20 years required to retire with full benefits. He could build toward retirement faster than almost any other new recruit entering the agency. In August 2009, Juan David Ortiz pinned on a new badge. He had traded one uniform for another, one set of rules for another, one sense of purpose for another. On paper, everything looked right. The decorated veteran had found his footing through a career in public service. The story looked good from the outside. Juan David Ortiz's first assignment as a Border Patrol agent was in Cotulla, Texas, a small, dry town about halfway between San Antonio and Laredo, situated in the scrubland of South Texas, where the brush grew low and the sun hit hard. Cotulla was not a glamorous posting. It was remote and demanding, the kind of place where an agent spent long hours in the field doing work that was physically exhausting and emotionally complicated. The work in Cotulla involved what all Border Patrol work involved: patrolling stretches of land along migration routes from Mexico, encountering people who had crossed without authorization, processing them, detaining them. For many agents, the work became routine and impersonal over time. For Juan, at least in those early years, it did not seem to go that way. People who knew him during his time in Cotulla described an agent who took the humanitarian side of the job seriously. He had his EMT training, and he used it. Migrants crossing the South Texas brush in summer heat frequently arrived in dangerous physical condition, dehydrated, sun-damaged, sometimes critically ill. Juan responded to that with genuine care. He was the one who showed up with water, who used his medical training to help people in distress, who saw the human being in front of him rather than just a statistic on a report. He earned good marks from his supervisors, who noticed someone dedicated, disciplined, and capable. He was bilingual, English and Spanish, which made him especially effective in a sector where communication across language was essential. The trajectory of his career began to move upward. He pursued education at the same time. In 2013, while working for the Border Patrol, He completed a master's degree in international relations from St. Mary's University in San Antonio. The degree signaled ambition. He was not planning to stay in the field forever. He wanted to move into intelligence work, the analytical and strategic side of law enforcement, where the work involved information rather than patrol routes. That ambition paid off. Around 2015, Juan was transferred from Cotulla to Laredo, the major city in the sector, and the location of the South Texas Border Intelligence Center. The Intelligence Center was the hub. Information from across the region flowed in, got analyzed, and was turned into operational intelligence that agents and investigators used to do their jobs. Getting a position there was a significant step up, and Juan performed well in it. He settled into Laredo. He and his wife Daniela purchased a home together in December 2017, a beige stucco house in the San Isidro subdivision in North Laredo. A new development of similar homes built at the edge of the city where the desert brush was still visible beyond the yards. They took out a mortgage of $240,000. The neighborhood was quiet and family-oriented. By 2017, Juan had been promoted to the position of intelligence supervisor at the South Texas Border Intelligence Center. He oversaw the flow of information about criminal activity, drug trafficking, and illegal crossings across a large section of the border. He had a staff. He had responsibilities. He had a security clearance that gave him access to sensitive operational information. Just before the murders began in 2018, he was told by his superiors that he was under consideration for yet another promotion. His career was, by every professional measurement, in an excellent place. His colleagues regarded him as hardworking and reliable. His supervisors were satisfied with his performance. His file was clean. On Sundays, the family attended the First Assembly of God Church. His neighbors in San Isidro knew him as the man who waved when he pulled into the driveway. Friendly enough, ordinary in the way people in suburban neighborhoods tended to be with each other. Pleasant without being particularly close. What none of them knew was that the man waving from the driveway was also driving down San Bernardo Avenue after dark, paying for sex, mixing alcohol with prescription medication, and beginning to feel something unraveling inside him that he had no vocabulary for and no safe place to take. The professional life and the private life were moving further apart from each other every month. There was a version of Juan David Ortiz that the people at the South Texas Border Intelligence Center saw every day. The professional, the supervisor, the agent who knew the systems, handled his workload, and showed up on time. That version was real. It functioned. It earned performance reviews that gave no indication of what was happening underneath. The other version was harder to see from the outside, but it was becoming harder to hide. By the time Juan was settled in Laredo and working at the Intelligence Center, his drinking had become something that people around him noticed. He was not a secret drinker who hid bottles and disappeared quietly. He drank in social settings, at gatherings with friends, at parties, in ways that stood out because of the quantity and because of what it did to his behavior. At one gathering with a group that included a former military friend, Juan became aggressive and strange. He challenged people to wrestle, consumed alcohol and pills in combination, and said things that made the people around him uncomfortable. At one of these events, in front of others, he said something that stuck in the memory of those who heard it. Snitches get stitches. Bitches end up in ditches. The people who heard it filed it away as bluster. The kind of thing people said when they were drinking and performing toughness. Nobody treated it as a warning. Nobody took it to a supervisor or made a report. It was just something the drunk guy said at a party. He was also talking openly about the women on San Bernardo Avenue. To colleagues and to friends, he mentioned that he knew them, that he had been with them, that he picked them up. For a supervisory intelligence agent with a high-level security clearance, this was reckless behavior that should have raised immediate concerns. He was essentially disclosing to people around him that he regularly visited a strip associated with drug activity and prostitution, using his personal time in ways that were directly incompatible with the professional standard he was required to maintain. Nobody reported it. Not formally. The information did not make its way into any official file, did not trigger any review of his clearance, and did not produce any intervention from supervisors. He was also seeing a therapist. During those sessions, he disclosed that he was experiencing suicidal thoughts. The therapist's response, according to what later emerged, was to advise Juan not to tell anyone at work about those thoughts, because doing so could put his security clearance and his career at risk. The logic of protecting his job overrode the logic of getting him proper care. He went through his next security clearance review and passed without any flag being raised. The medications continued. The alcohol continued alongside them. He had been prescribed drugs to manage anxiety, depression, and other symptoms of PTSD, and he was consuming them alongside large quantities of alcohol on a regular basis. The combination, medically speaking, could produce blackouts, periods where a person was functioning but not fully conscious of their actions in the way a sober person would be. In the same period, Juan began expressing something darker in the way he talked about the women he visited on San Bernardo Avenue. The comments shifted from casual bragging about knowing them to something that carried more contempt. He referred to them in ways that suggested he had started to see them not as people he was doing business with, but as a category of person he found offensive, a problem to be removed. The word he would eventually use in his confession was trash. He said he wanted to clean up the streets. And on San Bernardo Avenue, the women he was talking about went on with their lives, completely unaware that the man driving slowly past them in a white truck had already begun to think of them that way. One of those women was Melissa Ramirez. Melissa grew up in Laredo. She was dealing with addiction. And addiction in Laredo was particularly difficult to escape because there was nowhere nearby to go for help. No treatment centers, no structured support system, just the substance, the need, and the next day and the one after. She had 2 daughters. She was their mother, and that connection was real regardless of what her daily life looked like. Her mother watched over the little ones when Melissa was away for stretches of time. The family worried. They always worried. But Melissa always came back. In August 2018, Melissa said something to her mother that stayed with Maria Cristina for the rest of her life. She said, "They are going to kill me with a gun." Her mother did not know what to make of it. It may have been fear, or a bad feeling, or the kind of dark thought that passed through a person living a difficult life. She did not dismiss it entirely, but she did not know what to act on either, because there was nothing clear to act on. On the evening of September 3, 2018, Melissa was on San Bernardo Avenue. She got into a white Dodge pickup truck. The man driving was someone she knew, a regular client, someone she had dealt with before without incident. His name was David. He had money, and he had never given her a reason to be afraid. He drove her away from the avenue, out toward the rural roads running between Laredo and the surrounding desert. At some point along a county road about 2 miles outside the city, she asked him to stop so she could use the restroom. She got out of the truck. He shot her. Multiple times. He left her in the dirt and drove away. A rancher found her body the following morning, September 4th. She was face down in the dust of a county road in Webb County. Shell casings from a .40 caliber handgun were recovered at the scene. Investigators from the Texas Rangers, the Webb County Sheriff's Office, and Laredo Police responded and began working the case. Melissa's family found out the way families always found out. A phone call, a visit, a moment that divided everything into before and after. Her mother sat with the words her daughter had said 2 weeks earlier and could not put them down. "They are going to kill me with a gun." Melissa had known something was wrong. She had said it out loud. The women who knew San Bernardo Avenue heard about Melissa's death quickly. Word traveled fast in tight communities, and the women who worked that stretch of road were connected by circumstance and by shared experience. They talked quietly among themselves. They were careful. They were afraid. But one woman was doing more than talking quietly. One woman was asking questions and telling people around her that she already had a feeling about who was responsible. Her name was Claudine Ann Luera. Claudine Ann Luera was 42 years old and had known Melissa Ramirez well. They worked the same stretch of San Bernardo Avenue, knew the same faces, and looked out for each other the way people in difficult circumstances looked out for each other. When Melissa was killed, Claudine felt it as something that required an answer. Not just grief, but action. Claudine had not always lived this life. She grew up in a middle-class household where her siblings went to college and her parents provided the kind of stability that was supposed to point a person toward something solid. What changed the trajectory was a relationship she had when she was young. A boy introduced her to heroin, and something in her brain responded to it in a way that was, from that point forward, very difficult to undo. The slide began early and became the defining struggle of her adult life. She had daughters who loved her, and she loved them back fiercely. Her daughter Ciara knew what her mother did to earn money and never stopped loving her because of it. "I would cry, pray to God because she was on the streets," Ciara said, "but she was always reminding me how much she loved me." Now, with Melissa gone, Claudine started telling the people around her that she thought she knew who was responsible. She was careful but persistent about it. She did not walk into a police station, but she talked, and the talking reached the wrong ears. At the South Texas Border Intelligence Center, a request came through official channels. Investigators working the Melissa Ramirez case were trying to locate Claudine. They believed she had information that could help them find a suspect. The request passed through the center where Ortiz worked. He saw it. He knew they were looking for her. He knew she was talking. 10 days after Melissa's death, Claudine got into a white Dodge pickup truck on San Bernardo Avenue. The man behind the wheel was someone she had dealt with before. During the drive, she brought up Melissa. She pushed him on it. She confronted him in the direct way of someone who already half knew the answer and needed to hear it confirmed. As she was getting out of the truck, he shot her in the head. She was found alive on the same stretch of road where Melissa had been killed. The same rural road. The same .40 caliber ammunition at the scene. She was rushed to a Laredo hospital where surgeons worked through the night. She died hours later without regaining consciousness. 2 women. The same road, the same weapon. 10 days apart. Investigators now knew with certainty that they were looking for a serial killer. They just did not know that the man they were looking for was already inside the investigation, reading every report and watching their every move. By the evening of September 13, 2018, when Claudine Luera was found shot on the outskirts of Laredo, the Webb County Sheriff's Office had 2 bodies and a growing sense of urgency. The Texas Rangers were actively involved. Laredo police were coordinating. Multiple agencies worked in parallel, sharing leads and resources, all moving toward the same open question. Who was doing this? Captain Federico Calderon of the Webb County Sheriff's Department was one of the lead investigators on the case. He and his team had been working the Melissa Ramirez murder for 10 days already. Now they had a second victim and a second crime scene that mirrored the first with a precision that told an experienced investigator exactly what they were dealing with. The .40 caliber ammunition was the same. The location, rural roads on the outskirts of the city, was the same. The method was the same. A close-range shot to the head, the body left where it fell. There was no evidence of robbery, no evidence of a struggle that had gone wrong, no indication that this was anything other than deliberate and planned killing. They began to build a picture of the killer. The women were both sex workers from San Bernardo Avenue. Both had connections to drugs. Both were likely killed by someone who picked them up as a client. Someone with a vehicle, someone with money, someone they had trusted enough to get into a car with in the dark. The investigators knew the avenue. They knew how it worked. They knew that whoever did this had access to that world. They started canvassing San Bernardo Avenue directly, talking to the women who worked there. This was not easy. The relationship between sex workers and law enforcement was complicated everywhere. And in Laredo, it was no different. Coming forward to talk to investigators meant identifying yourself, potentially exposing yourself to legal risk for your own activities, and putting yourself in a dangerous position if the wrong people found out you had spoken. Many of the women who might have had useful information were not going to share it easily, if at all. Some information did come through. A name surfaced, David. A client known as David who drove a white truck and had money. He was mentioned in connection with Melissa Ramirez specifically. He was one of her regulars. But no one had a last name. No one had a license plate. The name and the description were enough to generate a lookout alert, but not enough to move the investigation forward with any real speed. Meanwhile, at the Intelligence Center a short distance from San Bernardo Avenue, Juan David Ortiz had access to every piece of information the investigation was generating. Every database request, every lead followed up, every query run through law enforcement systems, it all flowed through channels he could see. He knew what they knew and what they did not know. He knew exactly how far behind they were. He went to work. He came home. He attended church on Sunday. The investigators worked through the days after Claudine Luera's death with the urgency of people who knew another victim was possible if they did not find the suspect soon. They reached out to people in Claudine's circle. They heard that she had been telling people she knew something about Melissa's death. They tried to trace back what she knew and who she told and who might have heard her talking. None of these threads, as of September 13th, had produced a name that held. The investigation was moving, but it was not catching up. September 14th arrived. It was a Sunday. On Sunday mornings, Juan David Ortiz and his family attended the First Assembly of God. He sat in a pew as he did every week. The service ended, he went home. The afternoon passed. By evening, he was driving on San Bernardo Avenue. What happened in the next 12 hours broke the case open. Not because of any lead the detectives tracked down, but because a woman decided to run. Her name Erica Peña was 26 years old in September 2018. She worked San Bernardo Avenue and had known Juan David Ortiz as a client for some time. To her, he was David, a man with a white truck who gave her money for drugs, drove her to buy them, and then paid for sex. It was a transaction she was familiar with. And David had always been, by the standards of that world, relatively consistent. She had no specific reason to fear him. She was also friends with Melissa Ramirez. They were close in the way that women in that world became close. Sharing information, looking out for each other, keeping track of which clients were safe and which were not. When Melissa's body was found on September 4th, Erica was devastated and frightened. She did not know who had killed her friend, but she was paying attention in the way that fear made people pay attention. On the evening of September 14th, 2018, Erica got into the white Dodge pickup truck with the man she knew as David. It started out like any other transaction. They went to his house. They spent time there. Afterward, he drove her toward San Bernardo to drop her off. At some point during the drive, Erica brought up Melissa. The name came up naturally. It had been on her mind, as it had been on the minds of all the women on the avenue since her death. She mentioned Melissa's murder, and she watched what happened to David's face when she did. He told her he had been the second to last person to have sex with Melissa before she was killed. He said he was worried that investigators would find his DNA on the body. He said it with a calculated casualness that, in the moment, made Erica's stomach drop. She did not say what she was thinking. She kept her expression neutral and told herself she was reading too much into it. But she was not. Her body knew before her mind caught up. She felt sick, physically nauseated, unstable. She asked him to stop at a gas station. She needed air. He drove to a Stripes convenience store on San Bernardo Avenue. They sat in the parking lot. Erica was trying to think. She brought up Melissa's name again. She was not sure afterward why. She could not fully explain what impulse made her say the name one more time. But she did. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a gun. He held it up and pointed it directly at her. He said nothing. He did not make a threat or issue a warning. He simply looked at her with the weapon in his hand. What Erica did next was not a calculated decision. It was faster than calculation. She grabbed the door handle and threw herself out of the truck. As she pulled free, he grabbed her shirt. It tore away in his hand. She was running without it. Barefoot across the parking lot of the Stripes gas station, screaming for help. A Texas Department of Public Safety state trooper was parked at the pumps, filling his vehicle. Erica ran directly to him. She was hysterical, without her shirt, and she told him immediately. A man had pointed a gun at her. His name was David. He drove a white truck. He had told her he was a Border Patrol agent. She gave the make and model of the truck from memory. The trooper radioed it in without hesitation. Within minutes, officers across Laredo were looking for a white Dodge pickup registered to a Border Patrol agent named David. Juan David Ortiz pulled away from the Stripes gas station on San Bernardo Avenue after Erica Peña ran from his truck. He knew she had gone to the trooper. He knew she had told him. He knew a search for him had already started, or would start within minutes. By any rational calculation, the next move should have been to find somewhere to hide, to get out of the city, to stop. Instead, he drove back to San Bernardo Avenue. Investigators, Laredo police, DPS troopers, and Webb County Sheriff's deputies converged on the address Erica had given them, the home in the San Isidro subdivision where she said she had been earlier that evening. Officers approached the house. It was quiet. They made entry. Inside, they found a collection of firearms, handguns, an AR-15 rifle, boxes of ammunition. Ortiz was not there. They established surveillance on the property and began looking for the white truck. On San Bernardo Avenue, Ortiz was still driving. He picked up Griselda Alicia Cantu, a 35-year-old woman known to the people who loved her as Chelly. She was known for her personality, which was warm and distinctly her own. Her brother Joey was devoted to her. She had a life full of people who noticed when she was not in the room. She did not know what the man in the white truck had already done. She got in because it was the same calculation every woman on that street made every night. This one seemed safe enough, and you made the decision again. Ortiz drove Chelly to an overpass on the outskirts of the city. He pulled over. She sensed that something was deeply wrong. She told him not to do whatever he was planning to do. She told him that God loved him. He shot her in the neck. She did not die from the shot immediately. He left her under the overpass and drove away. He went back to the avenue one more time. He picked up Janelle Ortiz, a 28-year-old transgender woman who shared his last name but had no connection to him. He drove her to a gravel pit on the far edge of the city. He shot her. He left her there. He drove on. The police were looking for him. At some point during those hours, he posted 2 messages on Facebook, goodbye messages, sent to people he knew. Around 2 in the morning on September 15, 2018, law enforcement narrowed the search to the area around the Ava Hotel on San Bernardo Avenue. Officers moved through the parking garage floor by floor. On one of the upper levels, they found a man crouched in the bed of a parked pickup truck. He was wearing civilian clothes. He was not visibly armed at that moment. He was Juan David Ortiz. He did not fight. He did not force a confrontation. He got up and allowed himself to be handcuffed. Juan David Ortiz was transported from the Ava Hotel parking garage to a Webb County Sheriff's Office substation in the early hours of September 15, 2018. He was placed in an interview room. He was read his Miranda rights, the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, all of it. He acknowledged them. He was held on a bond of $2.5 million and placed on suicide watch, a precaution the department took given what they knew about his state of mind in the hours before his arrest. For the first portion of the interrogation, he denied everything. He sat in the chair and told investigators he did not know anything about any murdered women. He was calm and controlled, the trained intelligence operator who understood how these rooms worked and what investigators were looking for. He gave nothing. But something shifted after several hours. He asked for his handcuffs to be removed. The officers complied, and then he began to talk. The confession that followed ran for approximately 9 hours. Captain Federico Calderon was present. Texas Ranger Ernesto Salinas, who would later describe the experience as one of the most disturbing of his career, was also in the room. What they heard was not a breakdown, not an emotional unraveling, not the kind of confession that came from someone overwhelmed with guilt. It was methodical, calm, and detailed. Ortiz described each murder in sequence with precision, like a man delivering a professional debrief. He described picking up Melissa Ramirez on September 3rd. He said she had gotten high and passed out in his truck, and that he drove around growing irritated. When she came to and asked to get out, something shifted in him. He used a phrase that would follow him into every subsequent news article and every court proceeding. He said the monster would come out when he drove down San Bernardo. He referred to the women as trash. He said they were so dirty. He said he wanted to clean up the streets. He walked investigators through each of the 4 murders in detail: Melissa, then Claudine, then Shelley Cantu. And then he offered a name that the investigators in the room had not yet heard. He told them about Janelle Ortiz. He volunteered the information without being asked. He told them where to find her. Calderon would later testify that the information about Janelle surprised us completely. Until that moment, officers had no knowledge of a 4th victim. They followed Ortiz's directions to the gravel pit, and they found her exactly where he said she would be. He also claimed during the confession that he had blacked out during the murders, that the combination of his prescribed medications and alcohol had produced periods where he was functioning but not fully conscious of what he was doing. He seemed to be suggesting that he had not been fully in control of himself when the killings happened. But the investigators in that room were noting specific things about the confession that challenged that claim. He knew precise details about each crime scene. He described the exact roads, the exact locations, with spatial accuracy that reflected deliberate planning. He described the methods clearly and consistently. He said he had used his government-issued .40 caliber service weapon. He said he was worried about Claudine specifically because she had been talking. When officers searched the truck, they found the weapon. The ballistics report that came back later confirmed that the shell casings from all 4 crime scenes had been fired from that same gun. He also said something near the end of the interrogation that Calderon carried with him long afterward. He said that after Erica Peña escaped, he knew it was over. And he said he had planned to keep killing until someone stopped him. Texas Ranger Ernesto Salinas later described the moment Ortiz began describing the murders as unlike anything he had encountered in an interrogation room before, a quality of detachment that stayed with him. By morning, Laredo knew what had happened, and the city was trying to absorb something that, 48 hours earlier, would have seemed impossible. The news moved through Laredo like something physical. By the time the September 15th arrest was confirmed and Ortiz's name and agency affiliation were released, the city was struggling to process a fact that kept refusing to fit into any familiar shape. A U.S. Border Patrol supervisory intelligence agent, a decorated Iraq War veteran with a master's degree, a man who attended church on Sundays and went to work every weekday at one of the most sensitive law enforcement positions in the sector, had confessed to murdering 4 women on the streets of Laredo. 4 women whose deaths his own agency had been investigating. 4 women who were killed with his government-issued service weapon, the same weapon he carried to the intelligence center where the investigation's information was being processed. The colleagues who had worked alongside Ortiz at the South Texas Border Intelligence Center were, in the word journalist Rick Jervis used after interviewing many of them, flabbergasted. It was a total failure of expectation. A complete inability to reconcile the man they knew with the thing he had done. He was a good agent. He was reliable. He was smart. He had a future ahead of him. Some of them also began to remember things in the aftermath that they had not connected at the time. Comments he had made. The way he talked about the women on San Bernardo Avenue. Too familiarly. Too specifically. The drinking they had noticed. The behavior at social gatherings that had seemed odd but not threatening. In retrospect, the picture looked different. But retrospect was a kind of vision only available after the damage had been done. At the intelligence center itself, the institutional gravity of the situation went deeper than personal shock. Investigators working the Melissa Ramirez case had submitted requests through official channels asking for help locating Claudine Loera, a woman who might have information about the case. That request was routed through the center where Ortiz worked. He had access to it. He knew that investigators were looking for Claudine. He knew she was talking. 10 days after Melissa's murder, Claudine was shot. Whether the information Ortiz accessed directly contributed to Claudine's death could not be stated as established fact with certainty. But the sequence, investigators searching for Claudine, Ortiz aware of that search, Claudine dead 10 days later, was a sequence that investigators and the prosecution were very aware of. U.S. Customs and Border Protection issued a public statement after the arrest. The agency said that Ortiz's actions were not representative of the nearly 20,000 men and women who served in the Border Patrol. The statement was true in the obvious sense. Most Border Patrol agents did not murder people, but it did little to address the systemic questions the case raised, and critics were quick to point that out. The same year Ortiz was arrested, another Border Patrol agent in the Laredo sector was charged with murdering a woman and her young son. A third agent in a nearby town shot and killed a 20-year-old Guatemalan migrant who posed no threat. 3 agents in one sector in 1 year, each facing charges related to taking innocent lives. The pattern was difficult to explain away as coincidence. For the families of the 4 victims, the institution's statement changed nothing. Their people were gone. The man who took them had a badge, a clearance, a church attendance record, and a promotion pending. None of that had protected the women he decided to kill. In the days following Juan David Ortiz's arrest, the legal machinery of Webb County began to move. Ortiz was booked into the Webb County Jail on a $2.5 million bond and placed on suicide watch. He was processed, photographed, and placed in a cell that looked nothing like the house in the San Isidro subdivision where he had been living a week earlier. He was initially charged with 4 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for the attack on Erica Peña, 1 count of unlawful restraint, and 2 counts of evading arrest. The charges reflected what investigators knew at the time and what the evidence already showed. But the district attorney's office was looking at the totality of what had happened, and what they saw pointed toward something more serious. Webb County District Attorney Isidro Alanis was a career prosecutor who had worked in this region for years. He understood what the law said about crimes involving multiple murders committed as part of the same scheme or course of conduct. Under Texas law, that was the definition of capital murder, a charge that carried as its maximum punishment the death penalty. Within months of the arrest, a Webb County grand jury convened to review the evidence. The grand jury considered the 4 murders, the ballistics connecting them, the same weapon, the same ammunition, the same method, and the confession in which Ortiz himself described the killings as a sustained series of deliberate acts. The grand jury returned an indictment. The charges were upgraded to 1 count of capital murder. Alanis announced publicly that his office would seek the death penalty. In January 2019, Juan David Ortiz appeared in court for the first time in a formal proceeding and entered his plea. He pleaded not guilty on all counts. His defense team, attorneys Joel Perez and Raymond Fuchs, began building their case. Their central argument was already taking shape. The confession had been coerced, their client had not been in a condition to give a free and voluntary statement, and the PTSD, the medications, and the alcohol in his system, at the time of both the murders and the interrogation, were factors that had to be considered. Perez and Fuchs argued that Ortiz's right to remain silent had been violated during the interrogation, that he had indicated he did not want to speak, and that investigators had pushed past that and continued questioning him until he talked. They argued that a man who was sleep-deprived, heavily medicated, coming off alcohol, and suffering from combat-related PTSD was not in the same position as a person who made a clear, voluntary choice to confess. The prosecution prepared to answer all of that with what they believed was the most straightforward counterargument available: a 9-hour videotaped confession in which an educated, experienced law enforcement professional described 4 murders in methodical, precise, and coherent detail. The case moved into the pretrial phase. Motions were filed, hearings were held, legal arguments were made, responded to, and argued again. The process ground through months and then years. The victims' families, who had come to court expecting something to happen on a discernible timeline, found themselves waiting in a kind of suspended grief that the legal system produced routinely, and that those on the outside described as its own kind of punishment. 4 years passed between the arrest and the trial. In that time, Laredo carried on. San Bernardino Avenue carried on. The families of 4 women carried the weight of what had happened to their people, attending hearings, waiting for dates, trying to live in the ordinary hours between one court appearance and the next. In October 2022, just weeks before the trial of Juan David Ortiz was scheduled to begin, District Attorney Isidro Alanis met with the families of all 4 victims and with Erica Peña, the woman who had survived. He had committed his office to seeking the death penalty. He had said it publicly. But he believed the families had a voice in what happened next, and he asked them directly, what did they want? The answer was unanimous. Not one of the 5 people he consulted, not one of the families of the 4 murdered women, and not the survivor who had come closest to becoming the 5th victim, wanted Juan David Ortiz to be executed. Every single one of them said the same thing in their own words. Do not seek the death penalty. Alanis announced the decision publicly. He explained that the families had spoken with one voice and that he was honoring their position. Ortiz would be tried for capital murder. The charge stood, but the maximum punishment available to the jury would be life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no execution. The decision drew attention from people who had followed the case closely, and it raised questions that sat at the heart of how capital punishment worked in practice. If there was a case that fit the stated criteria for a death sentence, premeditation, multiple victims, calculated killing of vulnerable people by someone in a position of authority and trust, this was a strong candidate. And yet the families of the people who were murdered said no. Their reasons were their own, and they were varied. Some had religious convictions about capital punishment. Some did not want a death sentence to mean decades more of appeals and hearings that would keep reopening the wounds of 2018 for the rest of their lives. Some felt that a lifetime inside a prison was the more fitting outcome, that dying by execution was too quick, too clean, and that a man who lived inside walls for the rest of his life, stripped of everything he had built, was a more complete accounting. What they wanted, stated as clearly as their decision allowed, was for him to live long enough to understand what he had taken, to wake up every day inside those walls, to watch the years pass outside them without him. Their choice did not resolve the broader argument about capital punishment. It did not mean the death penalty was wrong in every circumstance. It meant that 4 families, who had more standing in this conversation than anyone else, had looked at this specific case and this specific man, and they had chosen differently than the system had originally planned. Their choice was honored. The trial would proceed in November 2022. Ortiz would face a jury that could only give him one sentence if they found him guilty. Life without the possibility of ever walking out of a prison cell. The trial preparation intensified. The defense team filed motions to suppress the confession, arguing for the last time before the jury was seated that the 9 hours of tape should never be shown to them. The prosecution responded. Judge Oscar Hale ruled. The tape stayed in. It would be shown. A venue change was also granted. The defense successfully argued that the years of media coverage in Webb County made it impossible to seat an impartial jury in Laredo. The trial was moved to San Antonio, to Bexar County, 3 hours north. The judge traveled. The lawyers traveled. The families traveled. On November 28, 2022, more than 4 years after the bodies of Melissa Ramirez, Claudine Luera, Chelly Cantu, and Janelle Ortiz were found on the roads outside the city, the trial of Juan David Ortiz began. The trial of Juan David Ortiz opened on November 28, 2022, in a Bexar County courthouse in San Antonio. The defense had successfully argued that 4 years of heavy media coverage in Laredo made a fair trial there impossible. So the proceedings moved 3 hours north. A jury of 8 women and 4 men was seated after careful questioning by both sides. The families of the 4 victims filled one side of the gallery. Many of them had been attending hearings for years. They had learned, through necessity, how to sit in a room and absorb terrible things while remaining composed enough to come back the following day and do it again. On the other side of the courtroom, Juan David Ortiz sat at the defense table in civilian clothes, controlled and composed the way he had always been in professional settings. District Attorney Isidro Alanis opened for the prosecution. He told the jury they would hear a confession in Ortiz's own words, describing how he picked up vulnerable women, drove them to isolated roads, and shot them. They would hear him call those women trash and say he wanted to clean up the streets. He closed with a line that would follow the case into every headline that came after. It is terrifying to have the enemy within the ranks of law enforcement. Defense attorney Joel Perez asked the jury to look past the record and the badge and see a broken Iraq War veteran, a man with documented PTSD, heavily medicated, whose confession had been extracted through hours of improper pressure rather than given freely. He asked them whether a married church-going man with 2 degrees truly fit any reasonable definition of a serial killer. The jury absorbed both arguments. The screens at the front of the courtroom came to life. The 9-hour interrogation tape began to play. The recording had been made at a Webb County Sheriff's Office substation in the early hours of September 15, 2018, and it ran for nearly 9 hours. The defense had fought for years to keep it out of the courtroom. They had lost that fight, and now 12 jurors watched it from beginning to end. What they saw was a man who denied everything at first, and then, after asking for his handcuffs to be removed, began to speak with a calm and detailed precision that did not waver. He described each murder in sequence, the roads, the locations, the exact sequence of events. He called the women trash and said they were so dirty. He said the monster would come out when he drove down San Bernardo Avenue. He described killing in the same detached tone a person might use to walk through a routine work task. Texas Ranger Ernesto Salinas, who had been in the room during the interrogation, testified that watching Ortiz begin to talk was unlike anything he had encountered before. A quality of detachment from the weight of what he was describing that stayed with him long afterward. Captain Federico Calderon testified about the moment Ortiz volunteered the name of Janelle Ortiz, entirely unprompted, telling investigators where to find a 4th victim they had not yet known existed. They followed his directions to the gravel pit and found her exactly where he said she would be. The defense pointed to the moments in the tape where Ortiz appeared to hesitate, arguing that these were signs of a man being pushed past his expressed wish to stop talking. The prosecution answered that a supervisory intelligence agent with 10 years of law enforcement experience and 2 college degrees was not a person who failed to understand his own rights. He had asked for his handcuffs to be removed, and then he had chosen to talk. When the tape finished, Erica Pena took the witness stand. Erica Pena was 31 years old at the time of the trial. She testified with a steadiness that held through every hour she spent on the stand. She described knowing Ortiz as a regular client, someone she considered safe, even friendly, before the night of September 14, 2018. She described getting into his truck, going to his house, and the drive that followed. She told the jury what he said about Melissa Ramirez, that he had been the second to last person with her before she was killed, and that he was worried about his DNA. She described the nausea that came over her, the moment he pulled out the gun, and the decision she made in a fraction of a second to throw herself out of the truck and run. She stood before the jury and showed them physically how he had held the weapon on her. The courtroom went quiet. Her account was consistent, detailed, and unshaken by cross-examination. The trial also produced an unplanned moment that cut through the formality of the proceedings. In the middle of a witness's testimony, a juror fainted in the jury box. A doctor on the stand rushed to assist. The trial paused while medical personnel responded. The juror was treated and eventually returned. The trial resumed. It was a brief but telling reminder that 12 human beings were sitting in a room absorbing the weight of 4 deaths, and that weight was real and physical. After 8 days of testimony, both sides rested. Alanis stood before the jury one final time and brought everything back to the evidence. The .40 caliber shell casings at all 4 crime scenes matching the service weapon found in Ortiz's truck. The phone data placing him at each location on the nights of the murders. The 9 hours of tape in which he described 4 killings with accuracy and precision that no innocent or unaware person could have produced. He described Ortiz as cold, callous, and calculating, and he returned to the phrase that had defined the prosecution's case from the first day. It is terrifying to have the enemy within the ranks of law enforcement. Perez made his final appeal on behalf of his client. "Look at the guy in front of you," he told the jury. "Broken, PTSD, migraine headaches, insomnia, nightmares." He argued the confession was coerced, that investigators had pushed past Ortiz's reluctance, and that the jury was looking not at a serial killer but at a damaged war veteran who had been broken long before September 2018. The prosecution, in rebuttal, pointed out that the description Perez offered, married, educated, professionally employed, outwardly stable, matched the profile of some of the most extensively documented serial killers in American history. A normal exterior had never been evidence of a normal interior. The jury went to deliberate. The families of 4 women sat down to wait. The deliberations ran for more than 5 hours. At approximately 7 p.m. on December 7, 2022, the jury signaled they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly. Word spread through the building that the jury was returning. The families of the victims took their seats, more than 20 of them, filling the gallery on one side of the room. People held each other's hands. Some prayed quietly. Some had been waiting for this moment for 4 years, and had run through it in their minds so many times that the real version was almost impossible to absorb. Juan David Ortiz was brought in. He took his place at the defense table. His mother sat in the row directly behind the defense team. Judge Oscar J. Hale took the bench. The jury filed in. The 4 persons stood. The verdict was read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Juan David Ortiz, guilty of the offense of capital murder as charged in the indictment." The room broke. The more than 20 family members on the gallery side reacted all at once, gasping, weeping, grabbing hold of each other. Some collapsed forward. Some made sounds that had no name. 4 years of waiting, of grief, of trial dates and postponements and hearings, and living inside the worst thing that had ever happened to them. All of it arrived in this sentence, in these words, in this room. Behind the defense table, Ortiz's mother collapsed into the arms of a relative beside her, sobbing loudly. Whatever she had been holding on to over the past 4 years, it was gone now. Ortiz himself stood still. His face did not change. He remained controlled while Judge Hale spoke. The judge explained the automatic sentencing. Because the death penalty was not being sought, a capital murder conviction in Texas carried one mandatory outcome: life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no separate sentencing hearing, no further proceeding. The conviction was the end of the road. "As you know," Judge Hale said to Ortiz, "this charge of capital murder has an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility for parole." With those words, the sentencing of Juan David Ortiz was complete. There was no separate hearing, no further deliberation, no additional process to wait for. The conviction itself had decided everything. The man who spent 12 days killing women on the roads outside Laredo, who went to work every morning at an intelligence center while investigators searched for him, who had a badge and a security clearance and a church pew and a family waiting at home, that man was sentenced in that moment to spend every remaining day of his life inside a prison cell. He would not be eligible for parole. He would not have a release date to count toward. He would not walk out of any facility under any circumstance for as long as he lived. The career was over. The house in the San Isidro subdivision was gone. The badge, the clearance, the promotions, the Sunday mornings at the First Assembly of God, all of it had ended 4 years ago in a hotel parking garage, and what replaced it was this: a sentence with no exit, handed down in a San Antonio courtroom in front of the families of the 4 women he had killed. Juan David Ortiz was led out of the courtroom. He did not look back. On December 19, 2022, 12 days after the verdict was returned, Juan David Ortiz was formally transferred out of the Webb County Jail. Sheriff Martin Cuellar confirmed the transfer and noted that Ortiz had been a persistent source of complaints during his 4 years in county custody. regularly filing grievances with jail staff and with the Texas Commission on Jail Standards. All of his complaints, Cuellar said, were reviewed and found to be without merit. He was transported to a state penitentiary several hours away in Brazoria County, south of Houston. The W.F. Ramsey unit, operated by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, was where he would live for the rest of his natural life. If this case moved you, if the names Melissa, Claudine, Chelly, and Janelle mean something to you now that they did not before you pressed play, then do something with that. Share this documentary. Talk about these women by name, because the easiest thing a society does to people like them is forget them. And the least we can do is refuse to let that happen. If you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to make sure that the people at the center of these stories are never reduced to footnotes. Subscribe so you never miss a case. And if there is a story you think deserves this kind of attention, leave it in the comments below. The cases will keep coming. We will keep telling them. Until next time, no way out.